make use of our Zoom chat. For instance, to post questions or comments in whatever language, because people are responsible or who have responsibility in order to take care for this. Now I would like to introduce to you our next speaker, who will be Reverend Dr. Chris Ferguson. Chris is a pastor, theologian, and social justice advocate from the United Church of Canada. He was elected to the post of General Secretary of the World Communion of Reformed Churches in May 2014. Since then, he is living in Hanover, Germany. Thanks so much for being with us, Chris. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Martin. And make sure somebody I can see signals me if I am going too quickly for the translators. I have been given, along with Nancy, and greetings and thank you, Nancy, to address the question of urgency of a more prophetic ecumenical movement. So I will probably speak urgently. And if I speak too quickly, let me know. I speak from the place of being part of the World Communion of Reformed Churches, which led really by churches in touch with the suffering in the global South, emerged into several key confessing moments in the life of this global part of the family. One was in the struggle against apartheid and the need to define our church teachings and doctrine, understanding that the very best of our tradition had been not only silent about, but complicit in offering the theological tools for the construction of a racist system of exploitation and tyranny. At its heart, the South African apartheid system was inspired and justified by Reformed theology. And in breaking with that, move forward from understanding our confessing mode to lead to deal with the crisis brought along by the rising up of global empire in the period of economic globalization and leading to the Accra Confession. And the clarity that Nancy spoke about has been found in our community's expression in the absolute rejection of neoliberal capitalism, its culture, and its ideology. The understanding fundamentally that we cannot both follow the God of life and worship mammon. But much of this has been lodged within the other truth that the ecumenical movement of which we are a part has been fed by a thin, dynamic, prophetic voice in touch with the suffering of the people, the destroyed and the excluded, but it is institutional expression. The depth and breadth of the church and the ecumenical movement has been functional for capitalism and empire, and has found a place within, similarly as has the United Nations, as a kind of multinationalism that has allowed the tensions to be dispersed, important witnesses to be made, but in the end has been functional for avoiding the confrontation with the limits of the inherited civilization, which is based on exploitation, destruction, hierarchy, toxic nationalisms, patriarchy, racial injustice. And so we struggle between the rising up of a language and a theological understanding that we have been part of the theological justification of the problem and are now embracing a new theological understanding of the urgency to confront, as we now call it in the World Communion of Reformed Churches. We understand that our theological putting the God of life in first place calls us to name, in what world is it that we see God calling us forward to life? And we name it clearly as a world fallen among thieves. And we, in the Accra Confession, saw that the cries of the poor and the cries of the earth were one. We embrace the idea of the common household, the Casa Comun, but at the same time, we don't want to be deluded that the commonality we share is of an earth community that is in its commonness exploited and driven down by the ravages of empire. And so in that sense, perhaps the earth community is the community that is in fact been excluded from this common household. And the earth community, people and creation are in pain, excluded and suffering. So the image is beautiful of the common household, and Nancy paints a beautiful image of how that house must be, but we are an occupied house. We are under domination, nothing more or nothing less, and that all too often attempts to address this by the ecumenical community, and this is where we really welcome and applaud and are part of the call as we go forward to locate in what moment must the World Council of Churches and all the rest of the ecumenical movement confront the reality that we are failing fundamentally to witness to the God of life to the degree that we do not distance ourselves and repudiate the common world order and its civilizational culture in which we live, which has brought us to the edge of destruction and exclusion itself, and which we are now coming to name as a context, this world fallen among thieves, as a situation of global apartheid, calling for a global revolution, a shared struggle, of which the ecological injustice and destruction of the earth and Mother Earth herself is part of the reality, but inseparable from racial, political, social, gender injustices, the economic dimensions of poverty. This problem is with the justice, peace, and integrity of creation call of the World Council of Churches. We saw the dimensions of peace and justice and creation, and then found a way to institutionalize playing these struggles off against themselves. And that we are again at the notion, as we can see, that in Karlsruhe there will be again a call to give primacy to one of the struggles over the others from the people who are in positions of power, as a way of trying to negotiate our place in a world of global apartheid rather than repudiate it, and absolutely, as an ecumenical movement, position ourselves. So one of the positioning is the who question. Where and who? where in this world is life most threatened? Who are the people and the communities, including the Earth community itself, that is the most devastated by the 1%, by the system of capitalism, by the system of exclusion? And we know that in this moment, we have been visited upon the COVID pandemic. And I think we all know the image, but theologically to reflect that this is an apocalyptic moment, an unveiling, a making plain, a taking away any mystery about the crises that are the fruit of the ravages of empire and that are maintained and exploited by the global capitalist system, and that represent both an ideology and a praxis of global apartheid. We also understand, Naomi Klein has been helpful and seen this in an earlier book, The Shock Doctrine, that the capacity of global capitalism to reproduce itself is extreme. And that once again, crisis capitalism is being used in this COVID crisis so that the very health crisis itself, rather than an opportunity only to move away from a death-dealing situation of necropolitics, as Membe calls it, a system where who lives and who dies is structured and promoted politically and socially. That rather than move upon this, there is a movement towards embracing the crisis in order to deepen and strengthen the exploitation and suffering of the earth and its people. The religious role that's being played in the maintenance of authoritarian governments is extreme, and that the ecumenical movement is called to a new moment of crisis in the Greek, of choice, of judgment, of positioning. The kairos that is upon us is now been made clear, that what is happening is that for all the uprising of life, there is equal or more potent efforts to deepen the captivity and the destruction, for this triumph of necropolitics over a culture of life. And that we must in this locate ourselves in the struggle, in the praxis, in the standing alongside those are most effective. And the ecumenical movement, there are those of us who do it, but as a movement, we are not well positioned. If I look over the last 10 years of the World Council of Churches in the pilgrimage for justice and peace, we can see all too often the positions of the ecumenical movement more adequately reflect the positions of the Norwegian foreign ministry than they would, in fact, of the destroyed, the marginalized, the tortured, the excluded, the hungry, the abandoned. And we know the language. And this isn't to reinvent a sermon. This is to say, we have now, again, a crushing, urgent opportunity. COVID has made it clear. There can't be a return to the same kind of normal. There can be, however, an institution of a new post-pandemic necroculture, or there can be the emergence of an ecumenical movement that, as Nancy has clearly said, in all the affirmations about ecological justice, make it clear we don't want to waste our time talking about carbon when we need to talk about our time of renouncing capitalism. A new economic model must begin from below with the rejection of economic impositions that destroy life, and to have communities build economies of life, but also on the ideological and theological level of insisting that through the God of justice, we can only defend and protect an economy that is an economy of life for all. And we cannot take half measures. All the mechanisms of dismantling. Debt is being used now at a tremendous speed as supposedly the road to recovery. These things must call for a standing up of the ecumenical movement. And I think we understand we should not be wasting our times trying to convert the whole ecumenical movement in its complexity, but to rather opt ourselves to stand with the poor, with the suffering earth, and call those who will stand with us to be part of the life-changing praxis for this common house. There is a moment of rupture that's upon us. Any religion that continues to defend necropolitics must be spoken against, and this prophetic lifting up of the economy of life must be for us. We must redouble our efforts. I'm in a place where not everybody in our communion would agree with this, to say the least. We play the double game, sometimes for, sometimes against. That moment is finished. We can't serve both mammon and the God of life. In a world fallen among thieves, as Nancy said, the choices are clear. Move out of empire, dismantle the capitalist system, solidarity with those who are rising up and demanding a world of life for all of creation.
Dear Chris, thanks so much for your clear, prophetic, and challenging words.